Today we shall discuss FEI and RANIS model of economic development. This model is an extension of the Lewis model of economic development titled as economic development with unlimited supplies of labor. The model was amended and improved by FEI and RANIS. We shall be discussing this model. Economic development involves transformation of traditional sector to modern sector. Economic development leads to movement of labor force from agricultural sector to the industrial sector or modern sector. Fundamental assumption is that labor is available in unlimited supplies. Fundamental assumption is that the supply of labor is unlimited. This means that labor is more relative to other factors of production. The basic feature of the model that there is large supply of labor in the traditional sector or in the agricultural sector, which can be absorbed in the modern sector, that is to say industrial sector, at no or little extra cost. Land is fixed. Agriculture uses land and labor as inputs, whereas industrial sector uses capital and labor in its production process. As far as the agricultural sector is concerned, after a certain amount of labor employed on land, there is a point. If we employ more labor after this point, there is no effect on output. The total output in the agricultural sector remains constant. Now, basic feature of the model is that there is surplus labor available in the traditional sector or in the agricultural sector. The economic development is limited by the rate of saving and investment. We shall not discuss how FEI and RANIS model is different from Lewis model. The points are given in the script. We are not going to discuss the assumptions of the FEI and RANIS model. They are simple assumptions which can be read from the script. We shall be discussing the basic structure of the model and how the model works. There are two sectors in the economy. One is the traditional sector, the other is the capital goods sector. The traditional sector is the agricultural sector and the modern sector is the industrial sector. In the agricultural sector, the techniques that are utilized, they are labor intensive. The farms are family farms and the total output is shared among the family members. There is no such thing as wage labor. In the capitalist sector or industrial sector, modern techniques are utilized. Use of capital and labor is there. Objective of production is profit. Before discussing the working of the model, we shall discuss certain terms. One term that is required to be discussed is surplus labor. The other is disguised unemployment. Surplus labor means what? Surplus labor means that there are large number of people in the agricultural sector whose marginal productivity is zero or near zero. They can be removed from the agricultural sector without any significant change in the output of the agricultural sector. The question arises is that if marginal productivity of labor is zero, then why are they being employed in the agricultural sector? The answer is that in the agricultural sector, there are family members. The agriculture is being run on the basis of subsistence sector. The main objective of the agricultural production is to get the subsistence. Therefore, all family members who are wishing to work, they get employment in the agricultural sector. The question arises is that if their marginal productivity is zero, then why are they not employed or removed, and why they do not switch over to areas where their marginal productivity is positive? The answer is this, that in the other sectors, basically the industrial sector, the opportunities are limited. Secondly, the opportunities of employment are limited because of the low rate of saving and investment, or in other words, lack of capital. Therefore, the family members do not have any alternative but to work on family farms. Secondly, on the family farms, the wages are not paid. The total output is shared by each and every member of the family. So long as this average output which they are sharing is more than what they can get elsewhere, they will continue to work in the agricultural sector in spite of the fact that marginal productivity of these people is zero. So this is the concept of, one concept of surplus labor. There is another concept of surplus labor which we call as the disguised unemployment. Now look at the last diagram in the script and at the bottom panel of the diagram. The number of the diagram, the figure is figure 5. I have supplied another diagram which can be termed as figure 6. One can explain everything with the help of figure 5, or for that matter with figure 6. In the bottom panel, if we look at the bottom panel, what we find that labor is being measured from left to right instead of right to left. And there is a curve which starts from point O in the diagram. With the help of the diagram, we shall discuss or differentiate between surplus labor and disguised unemployment. Figure 5 and the bottom panel. The labor is being measured on horizontal axis and output is being measured on the vertical axis. Labor is being measured from left to right. The curve OX is the total product curve of the agricultural sector. If the entire amount of labor is employed in the agricultural sector, then the total output is equal to AX. And the average share or the wage rate or the real wages received by the workers in the agricultural sector will be AX divided by OA. So look at the straight line from O to X. This straight line shows the total amount of production, and the slope of the line gives us the wage rate, or for that matter, the average output received as income by the family members. In the figure between point A and G, the marginal productivity of labor is 0. If we remove this labor from the agricultural sector and employ somewhere else, then there will be no reduction in the total output of agricultural sector. This amount of labor, AG, can be treated as the surplus labor. Now, if we further remove labor from the agricultural sector between the points G to T, here what we find is that the marginal productivity of labor is positive but less than the average productivity. In other words, the wages which the workers are receiving in the agricultural sector. If the labor is removed from agricultural sector and employed in the modern sector, or for that matter industrial sector, the output of the agricultural sector will decline. The simple reason is that marginal productivity of labor is positive. To the right of P, what we find, marginal product of labor is more than the traditional wage rate. Here, any shifting of labor from agricultural sector to modern sector will lead to substantial decline in agricultural output. Since at point P and to the left of point P, what we find is that the marginal product of labor is more than the average product or traditional wage rate, the result will be the agricultural sector and the modern sector will compete for labor. And here, in this case, there is a possibility of increasing wage rates. As far as the phase of surplus labor is concerned, this lies between G and P. Here, what we find, the marginal product is less than the average product. The efficiency criteria will tell us that we should remove this labor and employ elsewhere, where the marginal product of labor is at least equal to the average product. This section from G to P is what we call as the surplus labor or disguised labor, disguised unemployment. Not surplus labor, rather disguised unemployment. Given this discussion, now we are in a position to discuss the working of the RANIS and FEI model. In order to discuss this model, we will be using diagram 5, which is the last diagram in the script. The bottom panel we have already discussed. Now, look at this. There are other things which need explanation as far as the bottom panel is concerned. The two concepts that we will be introducing, they are total agricultural surplus and average agricultural surplus. The total agricultural surplus is the vertical distance between the marginal product curve in the agricultural sector and the straight line which shows the wage bill. When AG amount of labor is being withdrawn from the agricultural sector, the total agricultural surplus is equal to GF. Now, till the point G, when labor is being removed from agricultural sector and being shifted to industrial sector, the average agricultural surplus remains constant. The average agricultural surplus is total agricultural surplus divided by the number of persons removed from the or shifted from the agricultural sector to the industrial sector. Who are shifting from the agricultural sector to the industrial sector, they are in a way taking their food requirements to the industrial sector from agricultural sector. They get wages in the industrial sector which are just sufficient to buy this average agricultural surplus. The average agricultural surplus remains constant till the point G on the quantity of labor axis. When we remove more labor from the agricultural sector to the right of G, what actually happens is that marginal product of labor in the agricultural sector becomes positive. Therefore, any removal of labor will lead to some reduction in the total agricultural surplus. In our diagram, the total agricultural surplus is increasing to the point P amount of labor. When every amount of labor that is being withdrawn from agricultural sector and shifted to industrial sector is GP. The total agricultural surplus is increasing, but the average agricultural surplus is actually declining. Why the average agricultural surplus is declining? The answer is this, that the total output in the agriculture is declining because marginal product of the labor in this segment is positive. Secondly, the number of workers who have been removed from the agricultural sector, this number is now substantially large. Therefore, the average agricultural surplus is declining and it will be less than the traditional wage rate, which the workers are getting in the industrial sector. Now, this average agricultural surplus will continue to decline till point P amount of labor. After P amount of labor, if any additional labor is withdrawn from the agricultural sector, the average agricultural surplus will decline very sharply. The simple reason is not only the marginal product of labor in the agriculture now has become positive, but also it is greater than the average product of labor in the agricultural sector, or the wage which the people are receiving in the agricultural which people are receiving in the industrial sector. This is the point. Point P is called the commercialization, point of commercialization of agriculture. Now, we shall be talking about 2 points. Point G, at point G, what we say is that this is the point where we are facing shortage of labor. At point P, there is commercialization of labor in the agriculture, commercialization of agriculture, because marginal product of labor is more than the traditional wage rate. Given these things, now we are in a position to discuss the working of the entire model. For this, one is required to look at the top panel of figure 5. In the top panel of the figure 5, we have the industrial sector. The labor is being measured on the x-axis from left to right. On the vertical axis, we have the output of the industrial sector. We have on the vertical axis, we have the wage rate in the industrial sector. The curve DL is the marginal productivity curve, or for that matter, demand for labor curve, demand for labor in the industrial sector. And the curve SS is the supply curve of labor. Till point E, where the marginal productivity curve or demand for labor in the agricultural sector is intersecting the supply curve, the wage rate in the industrial sector is constant and is equal to the institutional wage or the traditional wage which is prevailing in the market. Now, in this diagram, what we find, the total wages which are being given to the people who are employed in the industrial sector is equal to OS multiplied by OG, or the rectangle OSEG. The total output of the industrial sector is ODEG. Now, after paying the wage bill, the industrial sector gets SDE amount of surplus or the profit. This profit is invested in the industrial sector. The result is that the amount of capital in the industrial sector increases, and therefore the marginal productivity curve of labor, or in that case the demand curve for labor in the industrial sector, shifts to the right. Now here D dash L dash. Now what we find is that since the amount of labor that is being shifted from agricultural sector is more than the point where marginal productivity of labor is 0, the result is that the wage rate in the industrial sector increases, because the agriculture is not able to supply sufficient amount of average agricultural surplus to meet the requirements of the laborers who have shifted. So point E is the first phase. From point E to what we call as point E3 dash, we have the second phase of development. And if more labor is employed or shifted from the agricultural sector to industrial sector, in that case the wage rates will increase sharply, because at this point there is commercialization of agriculture And the demand for labor in both in the agricultural sector and industrial sector will increase, causing an increase in wage rate. And the supply curve in the industrial sector will move up sharply. This is how the system is working. We can divide the process of economic development in underdeveloped economy according to FEI and RANIS model into 3 phases. In the first phase, marginal productivity of labor in the agricultural sector is 0. There is surplus labor. After migration of laborers from agriculture to the industrial sector, there is no change in the total output of the agricultural sector. Total agricultural surplus, as we showed, is the vertical gap between total productivity of labor and the straight line in the diagram. Now, which is equal to institutional wages. Supply curve of labor in the industrial sector in this phase is horizontal, which is shown by the top panel. Average agricultural surplus is equal to the institutional wage rate. In the second phase, which starts at point E or in the top panel or point J in the lower panel, marginal productivity of labor is positive but less than the institutional wage. The starting point of the second phase is the first turning point, and FEI and RANIS call it the shortage point. When shortage of goods, basically agricultural goods, begin to emerge. As more labor is shifted to the industrial sector, total agricultural surplus increases, but average agricultural surplus declines. Since marginal productivity of labor is positive, shifting of labor leads to reduction in the total output of labor. So, this is shown by somewhat upward slope in the supply curve of labor for the industrial sector. The second phase ends at point P in the bottom panel and at point E3 in the top panel. The second phase ends at point E3 in the top panel and point P in the bottom panel. Now here at point P, marginal productivity of labor is equal to institutional wage rate. Marginal productivity of labor becomes equal to average product or institutional wage rate. Total agricultural surplus is maximum, but average agricultural surplus declines. The boundary point of phase 2 is the point of commercialization of agriculture or commercialization part. Any shift in labor from agricultural sector to capital sector or industrial sector will lead to bidding of wages in both the sectors, because demand for labor will increase in the agricultural sector as well as industrial sector. Thus, second turning point is the point P or E3. This is the point of commercialization of agriculture. Any increase in shifting of labor from agricultural sector to industrial sector will now lead to increase in wages because of commercialization in the agriculture. The marginal product of labor becomes greater than the institutional wage. This is how we explain the upward sloping supply curve in the industrial sector. From this model, what we see that economic development is taking place because of capital formation in the industrial sector. As more and more capital is being employed in the agricultural sector, as more and more capital is being employed in the industrial sector, output of industrial sector is increasing and larger amount of profit is available in the industrial sector, which can be invested in the industrial sector, and process of economic development can be allowed to continue. Now, FEI and RANIS say something more about it. They say that if part of the profit in the industrial sector is invested, if part of the profit in the industrial sector is invested in the agricultural sector, agricultural productivity will increase. The total product curve will shift upwards and marginal product will also increase. This will bring about coincidence of point of shortage and point of commercialization. So the result will be, because of increase in agricultural productivity, the agricultural sector will improve. More labor will be available in the agricultural sector, which can be shifted to the industrial sector without raising the wage rates in the industrial sector. Or in other words, supply curve of labor in the industrial sector will shift to the right if there is improvement in the agricultural productivity. FEI and RANIS talk about balanced growth. They say that economic development can be initiated by investing simultaneously both in agricultural sector and industrial sector without leading to increase in the wage rates and prices. This is one difference which we find between Lewis model and FEI and RANIS model. There is another difference that we should keep in mind, and that is, in Lewis model, there is no interaction between the industrial sector and agricultural sector, whereas there is a possibility of interaction. One of the examples we have seen is when we were discussing the concept of balanced growth. FEI and RANIS do not deny the possibility of technical progress in the agricultural sector. So this is an improvement in the Lewis model. Now, after discussing the FEI and RANIS model, we face two policy questions. When labor is being shifted from agricultural sector to the industrial sector, then can we see that the consumption of those people who are left behind in the agricultural sector will remain constant? Since their relatives have shifted, they are not contributing to production or productive activity. Will it not be possible for the remaining labor force in the agricultural sector to increase its consumption? So the result will be, if this happens, there will be shortage of food to meet the requirements of workers who have shifted to the agricultural sector, and the industrial sector will be forced to increase the wages. The supply curve will not be a horizontal straight line. It will be upward sloping, as a matter of fact. One of the policies is that in order to get the agricultural surplus, the government can impose taxes on the agricultural sector. But practically what we find that this is a very difficult problem. In many countries, because of the fear of the vote bank, the governments do not increase taxes on that. Secondly, the prices of agricultural goods cannot be fixed or prevented from rising when labor is being shifted from agricultural sector. The reason is that if prices are fixed, we will be taking away the incentive from the people in the agricultural sector to produce more. So there are practical problems. But as far as FEI RANIS model is concerned, this shows the way in which economic development can be initiated in underdeveloped countries. There are certain other points which we would like to mention, which have been raised as criticism of the FEI and RANIS model. FEI and RANIS model assume that supply of land is fixed in the underdeveloped countries. In reality, in many underdeveloped countries, land can be reclaimed or land can be made more fertile and the supply of labor can be increased, which have been ignored both by Lewis and FEI and RANIS. Secondly, in many underdeveloped countries, the marginal productivity, wages are not above marginal productivity of labor. Since population is very large, wages are even below the marginal productivity of labor, or institutional wages are below marginal productivity of labor. Thirdly, FEI and RANIS discuss a closed model. If there is a shortage of agricultural goods, when labor is being shifted from agricultural sector to the modern sector or industrial sector, agricultural goods can be imported. This issue has been ignored by FEI and RANIS. Another issue that has been ignored, that when there is commercialization of agriculture, agricultural prices will increase, prices of industrial goods will also increase. There is a possibility of inflation which will have adverse effect on economic development. So these are some of the criticisms which have been leveled against FEI and RANIS model. In spite of limitations and criticism of the FEI and RANIS model, FEI and RANIS model gives us a model of economic development which can be applied to underdeveloped countries, or for that matter to dual economies. All underdeveloped economies are dual in the sense that the traditional sector or agricultural sector is the subsistence sector. The objective of production is subsistence, where the techniques which are being used are traditional. The objective is not profit. On the other hand, industrial sector is the modern sector. Modern techniques are being utilized and the objective of production is profit. Therefore, what we find, the two sectors of the economy are simultaneously existing. So we have a dual economy or an underdeveloped economy. This is all we can say about FEI and RANIS model. Thank you.